Welcome to the Defender Podcast,
where facts matter.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Dolly.
And this week we'll be talking about voter suppression.
As always, the thoughts and opinions stated on this show may not always align with the mission of Ballot Defenders or any other organization that we may or may not be a part of. We want to make sure that you understand that we are trying to be as nonpartisan as possible, but sometimes our thoughts and opinions creep in there. Also, make sure that you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Ballot Defenders. We are so excited to welcome back today our awesome feminist activist, Katie Beth.
So we've been talking about voter numbers across the country, and so far around the U.S., 52 million people have cast their ballots. It is incredible. So election experts are saying that votes might reach 150 million and that they're expecting the biggest turnout since 1908.
Wow. We are a part of history. It's fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. I know I went to early vote yesterday. Super easy. Went down to my local site, walked in, walked out, was done in like 20 minutes. I'd highly recommend it to anyone.
Yeah. And you definitely want to make sure you follow up, check that your ballot was received. We're saying that every single week, whether you're mail-in voting, voting in person, follow up with your supervisor of elections, make sure that your vote is counted, which again, it's so important to early vote. So you have that time factored in to make sure that your vote was counted. You can't do that on the day of, you know?
And so taking it back to Florida, so far we've had about 5 million Florida voters cast their ballots through mail-in ballots and early voting. For perspective, there's only 14 million eligible voters in Florida.
Wow.
And for even more perspective, more people have cast their votes than all the people who voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 election. So it's incredible. Like we say it every single week, like it is absolutely incredible. The amount of people that are getting out there, they're sending in their mail-in ballots, they're going in and doing early voting. It's amazing. It's giving us so much energy and it's keeping us going to keep this mission that we have.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to the Gen Z voters because it is looking really good in terms of voter turnout for people between the ages of 18 and 25. We did not see that in the last election. So keep coming, Gen Z. We see you. We appreciate you. We love you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's been so cool seeing all the pictures on my social media feeds. Just, we have been sharing on Ballot Defenders, all the photo submissions as well. So make sure you keep sending us your pictures. Use the hashtag BD Voting Challenge so we can find you and feature you on the pages, because we just want to spam everyone's feed with positivity and happiness and just like everyone getting out there and doing their civic duties. So it's been so cool just seeing so many smiles and so many people just getting out there and doing what they got to do.
Yes. So I did want to add one more note about voting before we get into our topic for today. There have been 14,000 ballots who have been rejected, the ones that were submitted through mail-in ballot. So if you did send in a mail-in ballot, make sure that you're going online and checking. It's very easy. You can go, you can check, you can see that your ballot was received, you can see that your ballot was accepted. If you see that it was rejected, you need to contact your supervisor of elections and you'll do what is called curing. So you will fix your ballot. You have until November 5th to do that.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
But we often have, tens of thousands of votes that get rejected that never get fixed. So just make sure if you did do a mail-in ballot, make sure you're checking in, make sure that your vote was counted. And if there is any issue, you do have time to get it corrected.
Very cool. And I think that is a great segue into today's topic. Just the fact that there have been so many ballots rejected for various reasons. So today we're talking about voter suppression. And before we get into it, I want to just define that for everyone, because maybe you don't know what that is, right? You hear this, I think it's kind of a hot topic right now, but people aren't quite aware of what that really means. So voter suppression is a strategy used to influence the outcome of an election by discouraging or preventing specific groups of people from voting. That is voter suppression in a nutshell. And today we'll get into how that's been shown throughout history and also today in our current affairs.
Yes, absolutely. And we can't talk about voter suppression without talking about the history of voter suppression. Voter suppression goes back to the 1800s, the Reconstruction era, and the passage of the 15th Amendment. As soon as Black men in our country were given the right to vote, we immediately saw tactics to stop them from actually fulfilling their constitutional right to go out and vote. We've seen this in a number of different ways: polling taxes, voter intimidation, literary tests and literacy tests, and even things like how many jelly beans are in a container, or how many soap bubbles are on soap. And these really just outrageous things to try to stop specifically minorities and young people from voting. So this has went on through the history of our country, and this goes all the way into the civil rights movement and the time of Martin Luther King. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that the famous Martin Luther King walk with John Lewis from Selma to Montgomery, that was specifically about voting rights.
Which I didn't even know. I thought that it was just about civil rights in general, like just the movement in general. So when we had started working on this and you told me that, I was like, that's something that we learned in school, but didn't even learn the actual specifics of that. So that just blew my mind.
Martin Luther King, along with John Lewis, they were doing nonviolent forms of protest to try to get our government to put an end to it, to say, like, this is enough, this is our constitutional amendments, and we all have a right to vote. And these tactics that specifically were happening in southern states, that the government had to do something to put an end to it. So this all came to a head during that march, and what we know on the Edmund Pettus Bridge now is known as Bloody Sunday. And this was televised across the nation, and people were appalled. I mean, they didn't realize that these things were happening, because a lot of times, if it's not happening to you and it's outside of your bubble, then you don't know the way that people are being disenfranchised, the way that people are being discriminated against. So this really brought this issue to the forefront in our country. I want to just give a couple more details about the history of voter suppression, because this is very important, that because of Bloody Sunday and Martin Luther King and John Lewis and their fight for voting rights, Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965 actually passed what's called the Voting Rights Act. And this tried to put an end to voter suppression in our country. And a large part of that was Section 5 of the Voter Rights Act, which made southern states had to get pre-clearance from the federal government before they implemented any type of voting change. So this could be a number of different things. Even to this day, ID laws, making voter registrations difficult, voter intimidation, closing polling places, tests, polling taxes. So the VRA and specifically Section 5 put an end to that in our country, and it was very successful. Unfortunately, in 2013, Section 5 of the VRA was actually struck down by the Supreme Court. So I think we're good to go ahead and start getting into our topics of the different ways that we see voter suppression in our country. I do want to say again that this is very high level. This goes very deep. We are seeing news article after news article of voter suppression in our country, tactics and strategies that are being done. So we don't have time to talk about all of them, but we will touch on a few of the most common tactics, and then talk about how you can fight back, what you can do, and how we can end this in our country.
Yeah, we're gonna talk on about 5 topics. This is definitely surface level. Do your own research, really dive in, because when you do, your mind will be blown. It's insane what we are doing to people in our country, to American citizens in our country. So do your own research, really get out there and see what's going on, because you got to leave your own bubble. Like, it's not sunshine and roses out there. You have to figure out what people are actually dealing with on the day to day so you can help them. So the first major instance of voting suppression in the United States, it's purging voter rolls. Now, purging voter rolls is not an illegitimate process. States do this to clean up their registration records, especially for people who have died or have moved out of state, or people who are incarcerated currently and cannot currently vote. The problem is that when these states start purging voter rolls illegitimately, in the way that they're known as use it or lose it tactics. So they are sending postcards to people in the mail to have them confirm their addresses, or saying that they've moved when they have not. And then this is forcing people to follow up on their voting registrations, follow up more frequently than they would have normally. So most people that they're targeting are minority communities, minority groups, and these people think that they're registered, and then they go and show up at the polls for voting day and find out that they are not, and then their vote is no longer counted. So this is actually happening most frequently in Georgia. This is a huge topic in Georgia right now, especially when Stacey Abrams was running for against the Republican candidate Brian Kemp. So he purged, at the time he was in charge of this election as well. So there's a whole nother conflict of interest there, another layer there, but he purged over 890,000 voters, which was 14% of the electorate. So realistically, Stacey Abrams could have won this election, but we do not know this.
That was one of many different tactics that happened in Georgia during that election, purging voter rolls. I mean, just think about it, put yourself in those shoes. And there's a couple good documentaries. One is called All In, and that was produced by Stacey Abrams. And there's also a documentary called Suppress that's on YouTube. It's only 30 minutes. And
Good one.
it made me cry. Like I watched it twice, both times that I watched it. What was done to voters in Georgia during the time that Stacey Abrams was running for governor, it's absolutely shameful. And if you put yourself in those shoes of, there's all this excitement about Stacey Abrams and even her history there, she has a really interesting history of how she got into politics. But, you just imagine that you're excited, you're going in to vote, and then you get there on election day, and then you find out that your name is not on the voter roll and that you can't vote.
I think it's interesting that at the beginning of this, when we started talking, that you called it a legitimate process, because maybe the process has legitimacy in the way that, yes, we do need to be having a data management system that can tell us who and where people are, but we have all of that information. We live in 2020. We have the worldwide internet. We have a way to connect all of these dots. You don't think that when somebody gets incarcerated that they go into a computer system. I guarantee you that they do. You think that when somebody passes away that they don't go into a computer system. So there has to be a way that we could set it up where they could easily be managing this data in a way that was completely nonpartisan, in a way that was easy to turn on and off. So if that somebody shows up at the voting poll and it's clear that they're not dead and it's clear that they're not incarcerated, that they could still be able to get their vote out that day. Yeah. So maybe the need is legitimate, but I think the process itself is corrupted.
Definitely, 100%.
Yes. And it was very intentional. Yeah. I mean, the communities and the people that this affected, I believe that affected Democratic communities and minority communities 4 times that of white communities. So, I mean, this was very intentional. All the tactics that happened in Georgia during 2016, and it's still happening. This is happening around the country. We're using Georgia as an example because it was so blatant there, but this is happening around the country to voters. And
there's so much racism there, like I don't know if you all heard that story about what happened to Stacey Abrams. I think it was in that documentary, Sarah, when she showed up at the governor's mansion because she'd been nominated for something, and they turned her and her family away because they got off a bus, because they were a Black family that got off a bus. So they said, you're not supposed to be here. And she had to fight with them for half the day that she was supposed to be being celebrated with others. It's just a wild time that we're in right now.
I can't even imagine how she must have felt losing that election. And to lose knowing that there was so much corruption going on, I would be livid, because like you're up against the system that you just cannot win right now. So we just got to keep getting loud about it, get super annoying, contact your legislators, and vote out the people who are doing this. Like, don't allow this cycle to continue.
Yeah. So voter suppression tactic 2 is making registrations and voting more difficult. This is another tactic that is happening around the country. And these things are, you may not even realize that they're happening. It's registration days they're being cut back. So maybe you had 30 days before the election, and now you have 40 days before the election that you can register to vote. And in general, this is happening around the country. Again, looking at Georgia, they don't have to process their registrations. They can actually hold their registrations. So again, looking at that 2016 election, 80,000 voter registrations were held until after the election. And they were allowed to do that. So that's
Criminal.
It's absolutely criminal. And I don't know about what other states are able to do this, but I know Georgia specifically that they can actually hold their registrations, and that is a direct attempt. It's a voter suppression, clear as day, to try to affect the results of an election.
Well, because the majority of these registrations, they look at the zip code, they look at a party affiliation. They're predominantly minority communities and predominantly Democrat as well. So it is the Republicans being really scared of what the outcome could be. They're trying to swing the election in their favor, and it's not okay.
Like, there's got to be federal regulation to stop these things from happening.
Yeah.
And that's, what you saw happening in 2008. So we knew that Florida had a hard time with voter suppression in the 2000 election. The Republicans were able to take that election, even though it's still unclear to this day, 20 years later. Wow, 20 years later.
Wait, really? 20 years? Oh my God.
Yeah. That, who won that election? I can't say that George Bush didn't win that election, honestly. But I also can't say that he did, and so I know that one of the most inspirational points for me in my early 20s was going on November 3rd to hear Obama speak in Jacksonville. And he was talking about all of the things they were doing to ensure places like Jacksonville, that has a very high population of people of color and a very varied population of people in terms of socioeconomic status, were all able to get to the polls and were all able to have their votes heard. And I don't think that the people have the same kind of faith that I had in the voting system that day when I was hearing about that. I don't see it happening anymore.
And that's truly the biggest issue of all. We need to have, and this is a whole nother topic, I know, but we need to have term limits. We need to have fresh blood that comes in frequently, because you're just getting these career politicians that are able to do these things because they have these years and years of connections and networking and dark money and all these things behind them. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And we're one of the only developed nations that behave like this when it comes to elections. And that's a big thing to look at as well. You have other developed nations that require voting, that make it on a Saturday, or give you the day off so you can all vote. Like, it celebrates voting versus what we're doing here, where it's like, oh, vote, but like, don't really, like vote the way that we want you to. Like, as a developed nation, we're supposed to be this huge superpower in the world, and like, we're not, and it's sad.
So the next topic is something that we're seeing happening all over the country, especially right now with COVID compounding the usual voter suppression that we say happening. And this is that they are closing, removing, or moving polling locations without even notifying people sometimes. And so one instance that I can point to, it happened in Texas in this election, where in Harris County, they made it so that there was only one ballot drop off for 4 million people in the middle of a pandemic. How wild is that?
It's insane.
Absolutely insane. So I know that Texas tends to be a fairly conservative state, and I don't know that that is why they're doing that. Maybe it has to do with a bunch of other things, but I know that it's definitely going to have an effect on who can vote and how they can vote.
Yeah, I think there's a big conversation around, again, this is about targeting minority communities and lower income communities. And so, we have cars and we're very lucky to have cars and to live in an area where we can find transportation if needed. But in some of these areas where they're very large counties, you're now looking at people who have to take time off of work. And that's something that they can't always afford to do or even able to do, to figure out transportation to go sometimes 4 or 5 hours away just to drop off their ballot. So now you're just discouraging these groups of voters because they can't even physically vote. Like, they can't take the time off work. They can't find the childcare. They don't have the transportation to get to these places. So now you're effectively guaranteeing that only middle class, higher income people can figure this out and complete their civic duties of voting by making it all the way to this one ballot box in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. And the justification for the ballot boxes in Texas goes back to the rhetoric that we're hearing from the GOP and ballot fraud, mail-in ballot fraud, and saying that the reason that they're doing one ballot drop off per county is so that they can monitor it to make sure that fraud's not happening. We know that fraud is not happening on an individual level. Mail-in ballot fraud is not happening. There has been nonpartisan studies. The federal government, Donald Trump, the White House, they looked into mail-in ballot fraud, and it doesn't exist. It happens at such a low rate that it does not affect the election. We know this. What is happening is voter suppression.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I saw this really beautiful graph. I love data. I don't know about you, but data just makes me so happy. And it was the country laid out, and the typical graph that you see of the country laid out, and it's showing where different counties are going red or blue. Instead of doing that, it actually showed the people and how they voted in those counties, and it completely changed the way that the map looked. I will try to get a clip of this and send it to you, ladies, so that you can put it up on your website. And it said, land doesn't vote, people vote. People vote. And if people don't have a way to get to their voting site, then they can't vote. Also, it causes extremely long lines, like you saw happening in Georgia in the 2016 election. I hate to keep going back to Georgia, but get on your stuff, Georgia.
It's fucked up right now.
Yeah, because it had, purged all of these and changed all of these voting sites. And then people had 4 to 5 hour waits, and it's happening again. It's already happening. You can look too at the experience I told you about earlier, where I walked in and out of my voting place the other day. I talked to my sister. She waited for an hour and a half at her voting place, and her husband waited for 2.5 hours. So we know that different locations are providing different options, and not everybody has the time to wait. My sister has 3 children. You think she has the time to wait for an hour and a half to vote? I mean, maybe in the pandemic, it's actually kind of early for her.
Yes. And I mean, we're seeing this in Georgia now. I mean, we're talking about the 2016 election because, we saw all those things front and center that were happening, and where people were waiting hours upon hours to go in and vote. And there were even things like the machines, like where you close all the polling locations, it's down to one location. And then they're taking out half of the voting machines. So then you have more people on less machines, and there's no reason for it. And, even now we saw in the primaries, and we see now during early voting in Georgia that there's still lines that are 5 and 6 hours long for people to vote. And this isn't just because there's a record turnout. Like, this is, again, it's a direct tactic to suppress the vote. So because some people can't wait. Like, imagine that you have a health issue, or, somebody who's elderly, that they can't wait an hour. They can't wait for 12 hours on the line, and, they'll be discouraged and have to leave. Or you have kids. Like, I have 3 kids. I couldn't go sit in line for 5 hours and leave my kids to go vote, like that would be a really large barrier for me to be able to fulfill my civic duty.
So the fourth biggest instance of voter suppression comes in the form of disinformation and general intimidation. And we have been talking about this throughout all the other instances of voter suppression, but we do want to make sure that we focus specifically on this as its own topic, because we're seeing this quite frequently in California right now. So the GOP members are setting up fake ballot boxes around the state that appear to be legitimate, and they even say official on the box, and then going to pick up these ballot boxes to do some ballot harvesting. So when I found out about this, it blew my mind, because I cannot believe that this is even happening. This is completely insane that people are setting up fake ballot boxes places, and then poor voters are going out and being like, oh, good, a really convenient ballot box for me, and then dropping their ballot thinking that it's going to be dropped off in an official capacity, and it's not. So that's such a major instance right now of basic disinformation and intimidation in general.
Yes. Well, and I think it goes into the disinformation that's happening directly from the White House and saying that there's fraud in mail-in ballots. So these groups are putting out these fake ballot boxes to harvest ballots because they're saying that, they have a right to collect these ballots to make sure that there's no fraud happening and that they're not being destroyed. So this, again, I mean, we're talking about disinformation and these fake ballot boxes, but this is a direct result of disinformation that's been happening over the past couple of years, and this attack on mail-in voting.
It's also important to remember that it's not just coming from politicians, it's also coming from the internet, which is one of the hardest things to combat, because we have, when they say that there were other countries that meddled in our election, they're not coming in and hacking our voting booths and, changing our registrations and purging our voter rolls. They're creating bot accounts, and they're getting on Facebook, and they're pretending to be these Proud Boys, and they're pretending to be, on the other side, they're pretending to be Antifa, and they're going into different chats, and they're going into different groups, and they're infiltrating, and they're just seeding all of this, disinformation that really keeps people into a place where they're like, hey, I don't even want to vote right now. So it's a whole other kind of seedy underbelly that's happening.
Yeah. And a lot of people are they fall victim to like that confirmation bias. If you don't naturally think critically about things, or you don't naturally question everything, like you read these things on the internet, and it's very easy for you to be like, that sounds right. Look at all these numbers and statistics. That's right. And then
it's being shared millions of times.
Millions of times.
Sometimes it's even being shared by politicians.
Because they're not fact checking properly. And so like what you read on the internet, not always real, usually not real. And so like you have to do your due diligence by researching. I've fallen victim to this many times, even throughout researching this stuff, thinking that something is real and thinking it's coming from a true source when it's not. So it's so important to question everything, even if you feel like it's like 100% true. If you feel very comfortable in it, that's probably the first sign that you should be researching and making sure that it is 100% accurate before you're sharing it with your audience.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I watched the new Borat film last night. I don't know if you guys know this, but Borat is back. Borat is back, and Borat is taking on this this time in America. And it was really interesting because at one point he goes and he lives with a group of people who he described them as Proud Boys, but he also said that they were really nice and really kind people that just were receiving information that was different. And so he actually forged like an intense friendship with these people and lived with them and stayed with them. And he considers them buddies, even though in the film he was kind of making fun of them a little bit. And I think it's important to remember that we're all, somewhere in the middle. We're all somewhere in the middle, and we're all being fed our own flavor of information. That's why personally, I have been taking a break from social media during this part of the election, because my mind's made up, and I don't need to participate in that. And that's something that we have to remember too. We don't have to participate in it, and we can walk across the aisle, shake somebody's hand, and say, hey, let's have a good decent conversation about this.
That's definitely what's missing right now.
Absolutely.
The coming together and just questioning everything together as a group, as a team, and just working together in general. That's sorely missed.
Yeah. Well, and in this topic too, so we talked about disinformation, but intimidation is the other side of it. Where we're at in Tampa, that there were armed guards that were going to polling locations. Like that's a direct attempt to intimidate voters to where, they're scared to cast their ballot. So that's another thing that we're seeing. And, there was emails that went out as well that were intimidating voters. We don't know the source of these, like, is this coming from Russia or Iran, but targeting voters saying that if you vote or if you don't vote for President Trump, that we're going to come for you. So there's those intimidation tactics as well that are happening. And it's not necessarily even happening from within our country, but spreading misinformation, spreading lies. We saw in 2008, there was robocalls that were going out to people saying that they had until November 5th to cast their ballot, which was not true. So for somebody who doesn't know, that maybe they're not online, maybe they're not connected, maybe it's their first time voting, they might believe these things that are being sent to them and not go vote or participate because they're being spread this misinformation or they're being intimidated.
And we might laugh at robocalls, oh yeah, no, we all know that a robocall isn't real, but some of them sound really
they
real.
sound really real now.
Yeah,
they're
some of them really do. And I mean, not everyone is of our generation, you know, so a lot of people are going to answer that phone because that's where they come from. They come from this generation where the phone rings, you answer it, and you believe that's a human that you're talking to, so it's wild.
And these are some really intense instances of intimidation. It can be as simple as I just recently read an article back down in Miami, Broward, where there was a police officer who was stationed at a polling place just for normal police work. Like there wasn't anything crazy happening, but he wore a Trump mask that said "No more bullshit." And he was in the polling place and he wasn't saying anything about, vote for Trump, or anything like that, but just having the mask on in a polling place is against the law here in Florida. So that's just you see a police officer who is a man in a position of power wearing this mask. That could be very intimidating for certain people, and very scary for certain people. So it's even as simple as just wearing certain things in areas that you're not supposed to be wearing it by law.
I think also, I mean, just to speak for the other side, I have personally experienced shaming from my friends because I, at another point in my life, was a third party voter. I'm not at this point, and I won't say which way I'm going on this, but I did have friends who were extremely liberal who shamed me for that and made me feel very small and made me feel very bad about how I had voted. And so I think that is another way of, intimidating a voter is to not,
shame.
To not listen to your friends, to not, validate. There is a way to listen and to say, hey, your vote is valid, whether or not I'm voting the same way, without, making somebody feel small, without making somebody feel like maybe I shouldn't have voted that way, or maybe I shouldn't vote in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Because voting is, it's one of our fundamental rights as citizens. It's our constitutional right to vote, to have a say in the leadership in our country and in our community at a federal, at a local level, the amendments that are on the ballot. Like, this is our right. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you're voting for. If we continue to allow these tactics, they may not affect you right now, but eventually they could. So that's why even if you never experience these things, think about the long term and think about our rights. And, we have to stand up and we have to encourage people to vote and not discourage. You shouldn't be discouraging participation in our civic duty of voting, regardless of whether you agree with somebody or not.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, that's why I love what you both do here with Ballot Defenders, is I know that, you are a nonpartisan organization and you're really just trying to get out the vote. I am a fan of you, and I do subscribe. I recommend everybody else to subscribe to their YouTube channel as well. And I saw last week, somebody get on and to express a political view that was, I know just from knowing y'all personally, different than your own personal political views, and I saw you celebrate it, and I thought that was really cool. I thought that was really awesome, because that shows that you're not just saying that you're here to support everyone, that you're actually here to support everyone, and that's what we need more of in this country.
Yeah, voter disenfranchisement, voter suppression, that I feel hurts Sarah and I very deeply, just because of the true mission of this organization. Like, we don't care what you're voting for as long as you're doing it, right? And so the fact that there are all these things in place to stop people from getting out there and having their voices heard is just, it hurts my heart, because it doesn't need to be this way. Like, we are a huge country and we have come so far as a country. Everyone should have their voice heard, regardless of where they may be at or what they feel.
So the fifth instance of voter suppression that we see in our country is felony disenfranchisement. So this is something that goes back all the way to the Jim Crow era in the 1800s, and with the passage of the 15th Amendment, giving Black men in our country the right to vote. This was another tactic of voter suppression that started all the way back in the 1800s to try to limit the vote of the Black community. And what this basically means is that if you are convicted of a felony, your right to vote is then taken away from you. So we see this directly in Florida, where we are from. In 2018, Florida overwhelmingly passed Amendment 4 that gave people that had a felony, gave them their right to vote back. Since then, we have seen from our government, specifically from our governor, Ron DeSantis, barriers to this population of people who are affected by felony disenfranchisement that is essentially making them pay a poll tax by having to pay off any court fees or any type of fees or fines associated with their felony, even after they've served their time. So this has went in and out of the courts, and it went to a district judge in Florida that voted against the bill put up by Ron DeSantis, saying that, no, you can't do this. This is essentially a poll tax. It's illegal. So then it went to the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, and then they went back and said, no, actually, that, this amendment, it says all terms must be fulfilled. So felonies actually don't have the right to vote until all of these fees are paid. So now this is actually going to be going to the Supreme Court. So this hasn't been corrected, or there hasn't been a final decision for this current election that we're in. So this will develop more over time. But you have a lot of groups that are fighting this, that, are essentially saying that this is a poll tax. This is the same tactics that we saw in the 1800s to try to stop, specifically minority communities, try to stop them from voting. Like, we voted. The people of Florida voted. They said that people who have felonies can get their right to vote back after they have served their time. And now we have our government is trying to stop that and putting barriers in the way of felonies, people who've been convicted of a felony, of them actually getting that right to vote back.
Yeah, and as a reminder, and we talked about this during our podcast on the amendments, we have a supermajority law in Florida. We have to pass an amendment by supermajority. That means that 65% of all of Florida said, yes, we want this for our fellow Americans. And so the fact that the government of Florida is fighting so hard to overturn something that was so clearly decided by the people of Florida is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, they have fought since the second it was passed to try to overturn this. And it's very clear why. Like, they know that a large majority of felons are minorities because of what is in place here in Florida. So it's just unacceptable.
This is something I'm very passionate about. I am the child of an incarcerated person. I personally believe that we should not remove people's rights to vote just because they're being incarcerated. What you're seeing in most places is this push for people who are incarcerated to actually work, and they're working for free. So not only are we not paying these people, but also we're not giving them the right to be tax earners, and we're not giving them the right to vote. So one of the things that just happened a couple weeks ago that I didn't see in the news at all was there was a court that ruled in the favor of inmates to give them stimulus checks for the coronavirus. And I think that that's absolutely wonderful, because the argument was these people work. These people work, and they're also not being paid for their work. So they should absolutely have the right to earn money. And I think they should absolutely have the right to vote. It's even harder than you think to get that right back. So it's not all felons. It's only non-violent offenders. If you're a violent offender, you can never get the right back. And you know what? Maybe that's the way it should be. Maybe we should just look and say, violent offenders, you forfeited that right. But someone who has, you know, say charges for marijuana crimes and now lives in a place where marijuana is legal, some of those places are purging those crimes. Some of the places, they're living in a state where marijuana is legal. They have marijuana crimes, and it's preventing them from moving forward and voting in their lives. It's just this really wild thing that I can't believe that we're even really arguing about. It is absolutely seated in racism, and absolutely 100%. 100% seated in racism. And you know, I think that my father deserves the right to vote, even though he's an incarcerated individual. Why should he not deserve the right to vote? He is of sound mind, you know.
And you think about what people who have felonies. I mean, this could be something that happened when they were 18 years old. Like, people make mistakes. I've made mistakes. We've all made mistakes. And to then have to pay for that for the rest of your life. And this isn't just about voting. This is about somebody who has a felony on their record. They are going to struggle for the rest of their life, even to get a decent job. Exactly. And now you're saying that they are less than human, less than other Americans because they possibly made a mistake. And if you really look into what's happening with, you know, these polling taxes for people who've had felonies, it's not just like, okay, well, you find how much court fees that you have to pay. Like, no, our system is so messed up. People can't even find out how much they owe.
Or it's such a ridiculous amount of money. Like, that's another
that they'll never pay it off.
That they can't ever pay it off for something totally simple or silly. It's this astronomical court fees that they're putting in place as well. And just looking at just the disenfranchisement in the court system specifically. So this goes all the way down to who we're arresting, how we're arresting them, the difference between, you know, a person of color and a Caucasian person with the same charges, the same history, the same background, and how they're being charged and the results of that charge at the end of the day. So like, this is not just like, oh, I committed a crime and, you know, I need my right to vote. Like, this is a systemic issue down to, like, from the very beginning, the very bottom of who's getting arrested.
So this past weekend, we went to an event. It was called Your Vote Matter, or A Night Out That Matters, hosted by a local group in Tampa. And they had the state attorney there. And then they also had somebody who was up for a judge position. And they were talking about racial discrimination. And a comment that stuck out to me, they said, if you don't believe that racial discrimination is happening in our country, go sit in a courtroom for an hour and see what's happening to white people. And then you see what's happening to minorities and the sentences that they are getting for the same crimes. Like, this is, I mean, again, this is a tactic that started in the 1800s with felony disenfranchisement. It was part of the Jim Crow era. It is something that was embedded into our culture where we just believed if you had a felony, you could not get your right to vote back. And that is just something that we accepted. People fought, people pushed back. We as a state said that, no, this is not okay. Felonies deserve to get their right to vote back. And now you have our government trying to do whatever they can to stop it. And it's not right.
Yeah, it's really important to note too. I know Katie said that like, a lot of people are, working for free, but in a lot of states, that's not the case. So we're looking in California, and we have, for example, all the California wildfires. They were tapping into the local prisons there, and those prisoners were working for $2, $3 a day, fighting fires, like being trained to be actual firefighters, working for $2 or $3 a day. A lot of people who get out of prison, they are now taxpayers. Like they get jobs, they're paying taxes. And now you're saying that you are a taxpayer and you have no right to vocalize what matters to you, or to put people that you're paying taxes. You should have the right to determine who's going to enact certain laws on your behalf. So this is just, felony disenfranchisement is truly its own topic. It's very deep. It's so much. It's so much that people really need to start questioning everything, because it is a truly systemic problem. And it's about cycles of poverty, cycles of abuse, cycles of arrest. And then also we're talking about, school to prison pipeline as well. Like it's just such an advanced topic that really needs to be examined more closely.
So what can we as citizens do to stop this? What can we do to stop voter suppression? What can we do to stop felony disenfranchisement? And we have to speak out. We have to speak up. We have to fight. Like, even if this does not affect you on a personal level, like you need to fight. These things that are happening, they are not right. And you need to call your state representatives, call our governor DeSantis. If you live in another state, call your state legislators. They work for us. Mm-hmm. And you need to get them on the phone. You need to call them. You need to write them letters. You need to get other people to do the same and say that we will not stand for this.
I think it's really important to note that these certain individuals who are fighting so hard to use these different tactics, they wouldn't be doing this if they were not scared, if they truly did not know that we as voters have power. So it's really something to remember. And like, if you don't take anything away from this, take that away. Like, we have power, or they would not be fighting this hard to diminish that power.
Absolutely. So the other ways that we can stop this, you got to show up and vote. You got to go vote. And if we vote, they can try whatever tactics they want. I don't care how long you have to stand in line. You stand in line and you wait. Whether it's early voting, whether it's election day, if you are in line before 7 p.m., you have a right to vote. So yes. Go out there and vote early. If you vote early, you are less likely to run into issues when you go to cast your ballot. So if you go early, maybe there's a clerical issue. Maybe you have to sign a provisional ballot, but that gives you time to correct whatever issue you may find. So we have to show up in large numbers. We have to vote early. And I don't care what these groups do. I don't care what legislators do. I don't care what other countries do. Like, this is our country. And, we have to fight. We have to go vote. And regardless of what tactic they try to use, we don't let it work.
Yes.
Yeah. Speak out, speak up, and fight for your right to vote. Volunteer with different groups in Florida, like the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. They had a huge push for voter disenfranchisement and trying to get that education out there. Calling your state representatives, like Sarah said, focus on who is your local representatives, because again, they're working for you. They are afraid. They want to make sure that they can stay in power. So they will do what they can to make their constituents happy. And then keeping the resources on hand. We've been sharing this on our social pages, but and Sarah can speak more on this, but 1-866-OUR-VOTE is a great resource to help communicate on any experiences of voter suppression or voter intimidation in your state.
Yes. So if you show up to the polls and there's long lines, if you are intimidated as you're going to cast your ballot, if you see any form of voter suppression, you can call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. There will be people on hand to help you. There's also people who, there's poll watchers that are at the polls that will likely have a sign like, how can I help you? Do you have questions? Those people are there to help you to make sure that you're able to cast your ballot, do it safely, and make sure that you don't run into any issues during early voting or on election day. Before we end today, I do want to share two quotes. One is from the late John Lewis, who we know fought so hard for voting rights. And I think this is just really powerful. And it says, "I say from time to time that the vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool or instrument that we have in a democratic society, and we must use it." So as you're going to vote, whether early voting on election day, remember that. Remember the people who fought. Remember that, the saying, if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to stop it. Get out there and vote. And then, I have another quote from Martin Luther King, and it says, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." Don't be silent about these issues. If you see it, say something. Reach out to your local legislators, talk to your friends, and we can fight back against these tactics that are happening. And us as the American people, we have to come together and we have to fight for our democracy.
So that is our show this week. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we love seeing you. Every Monday, we drop a new episode. Make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Ballot Defenders. Ring that bell so you get notifications every time that we post a new video. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for some super cool content every single day. Again, at Ballot Defenders. And make sure that you submit your voting pictures. We want to feature you. So hashtag BD Voting Challenge on social platforms so we can find you and feature you on our social channels as well as our website. And as always, peace out.